Welcome, bom dia. My name is Ilana Mountian. I'm a researcher here at USP, and we're going to start the seminar, and I would like to invite the speakers here. So, could you please come, Maria Isabel da Silva Leme. Professor Robert Clive, Professor Danilo, there, and we are going to start then with Maria Isabel, and then Robert Clive, and then Danilo.
Good morning. I wish to welcome you and thank you for your visit. In behalf of the Dean of the Institute of Psychology and on my behalf also. And I regret I can't stay because I have other meetings, but I wish you a wonderful meeting and a very profitable visit here, okay? Thank you.
And I would like to invite also Professor Guy Lord. Sorry, I didn't see your name here. Please.
Okay. On behalf of the Chicago School, I would like to introduce who we are. My name is Dr. Lord Giri, or Professor Lord Giri, and here we also have Dr. Robert Liv. We have about 17 students, or 16 students. All of them are PhD level students in psychology. We have two different tracks within the International Psychology program. One is focused on trauma and one on organizational systems. So they are very, very excited to be here. They have enjoyed being in Brazil and they look forward to interacting with you all today. Thank you. So, good point. He was asking what we meant by international psychology. The degree that the students are enrolled in is designed to train students to not only look at Western theories or theories that have been developed in the West, but to think globally. So we try to encourage them, for example, when they come to a nation such as Brazil, to learn the psychology that has been developed in Brazil. So when they do any type of consulting, they don't attempt to take Western point of view and impose it in Brazilian context, but to look at what works in Brazil, the culture of Brazil, and to be able to incorporate what they have learned in the West with what is used and what works in the local context. So it's basically just internalization of psychology, broadening the scope of psychology so that it's not focused solely on Western theories, but focused on a much broader worldview.
So another important context is we are not a clinical program. We are a research-based program. So their final deliverable for the PhD is their dissertation, which in the United States we call a dissertation for PhD, thesis for master's, which I know is the opposite here. So, and when we're doing the training, I was a student in the International Psychology program, the first cohort. So I had the honor of working with USP to conduct my research cross-culturally. And I'm going to present on the research that I conducted today. But the focus is that they either do a study of research in a cultural way, cross-cultural, or also looking at indigenous psychologies, of which we are encouraging them today to better understand the psychology of Brazil, how it has transitioned from Europe. You know, I know it's very psychodynamic, psychoanalytic in its focus, but also how Brazil has embraced it and made it their own psychology. So that's a very, very critical point to understand and to develop respectful dialogues with other countries, okay? So this group is immersed. They've had an entire week in São Paulo. We've done everything from go to Paraisópolis community to Santa Marcelina Hospital. We worked with Caritas, the basic healthcare unit. And now today we're at USP, so they've had a very packed schedule. They also on Saturday got to go to Samba, and they learned feijoada and samba, so they got to enjoy that. And yesterday, I think some went to Ibirapuera, Republica Park, so they had a chance to see your beautiful city. It's wonderful. So thank you for having us. This is the first time our group has come to USP. So we're very grateful that you have us here today. And we hope you invite us back.
Yeah, I'm going to sit up there so I can see.
Good morning. First, I'd like to say thank you to Pablo, who invited me to present my work here. I will present the Amerindian Support Network, Psychology Interethnic Dialogues. I think I should be in that place because of, yeah. I'm a professor here from 5 years, and after my first year, I started to develop this project that's a kind of extension. I don't know if you have this word. In Brazil, you have, the university has three main functions in the society. One of them is the teaching, the other is making research, and the other is extension programs. That means that we go to the society and we develop works together with the community. Well, I'm here in the Institute of Psychology, and that's Education, Research and Services. And it's just a small presentation. I will have more or less 456 students and 5 graduate programs. And concerning the graduate programs, we have experimental psychology, clinical psychology, educational and developmental psychology, social psychology, and neuroscience and behavior. I'm in the experimental psychology, and inside this program, we have different research areas, and I belong to these theoretical and methodological issues of psychology that has feel to do with making experiments, but it's more a philosophical and theoretical and methodological reflections. Into this program and into this department, it's also the name of the department I work on. We have I developed this Amerindian Support Network. That's a community service headquartered here, and the objective is to identify the psychosocial vulnerabilities faced by Amerindian peoples here in Brazil, and to find possible strategies to overcome some threatening impacts of the colonial and post-colonial process. And we have undergrad students from different courses, psychology, history, social sciences, and others, and graduate students in psychology that also participate in the construction of a collaborative work with the communitarian leaders. I'd like to present for you, I don't know if you know Latin America and the presence of Amerindian population in Latin America. And here you can see the proportion of the population in different countries. And Brazil, we have 0.5% of the population that self-declare themselves as Amerindian. But we need to remember that people, for 500 years, the Brazilian society made a kind of brainwash in the people in order to them to miss their ethnic belongingness. So until now, we have many people that they know that they belong to this tradition, their families came from this tradition, but they are not able to say, or they don't want to say because of prejudice and different kind of thing. Only in the 80s, in the end of the 80s, the Brazilian state allowed Amerindian people to have their own cultural practices, their language, and their way of living. So in the constitution of the 1988, they got the rights of being an ethnic group with a self-ethnic affirmation and so on, and with the rights over the land and a specific education and a specific healthcare system. But it's very recent, less than 30 years. So then the result is that we have only 0.5% of population self-declaring Amerindians. But what's interesting is that here you can see that from all countries in Latin America, Brazil is the most varied. Like we have the higher diversity of ethnic groups. 305 different ethnic groups in the country. So these populations, they are dispersed in all the country, and they could keep their ethnicity even though all this colonial process. So we have 274 languages that are still that they still keep speaking. They still speaking 274 different languages, and 36% of this population live in urban context. And here in São Paulo, in the state of São Paulo, we have 0.1% of the population that self-declare, because most of them are living in the country, and São Paulo is a urban place, and with the highest population in Brazil. So, but even though São Paulo, the city, is the fourth city in Brazil in terms of the amount of Amerindian people. And we have 38 lands, the market lands for Amerindian people here. And this is the map of the municipality of São Paulo, the territory of the municipality. And we have in this territory two main lands demarcated to Amerindian people. And we work here with the students in that place, that's Jaraguá, demarcated territory. Yeah, it's better. And in this land we have mainly Guarani people. That's one of these 300 ethnic groups. And they speak their own language. And they are a multinational. They live not only in Brazil, they are dispersed in different areas in Brazil and also in Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, Bolivia. So they are distributed in different countries. For them, they say they have an expression that's Uerupá. They say the land is only one. This division in countries is not a division. They don't agree with this. They don't, in their cosmology, it doesn't exist. It's an invention of white people. Well, I work with cultural psychology. And for us, the routes for the construction of mutual and collaborative understandings are not direct or transparent. And we are also linked with some dialogical theories and dialogical philosophy, and from Bakhtin theories, and also Vygotsky, Ernest Bush, and different authors in USA. There was a professor that I studied 6 months in Clark University, Massachusetts, with Professor Ian Valsner. That's one professor that are collaborating with us too. And we have, for instance, in the dialogical theories, we have this kind of triangular notion of dialogue, and we have Amerindian perspective, Western perspective. And for instance, concerning the notion of person, we have a nebulous field, because they have their own conceptions of person, and we have our conceptions of what is a person and how, what are the main aspects and how people evolve and how can we upbring our children. We have different conceptions. And in this dialogical field, there is a field of negotiation that's very it's nebulous. And I believe that the triangle is not a good representation of the minimal communicative situation. Why? Because we as psychologists, we have our own field of discussion, our concepts, and we are able to discuss our concepts from different perspectives. But, for instance, concerning Maya conceptions of person, there are also different conceptions in the different Mayas peoples, because they are different peoples that are linked with this tradition. So each ethnic tradition contains or a multiplicity of perspectives. And the dialogue happens only if you have some basic roots that are common. But between our psychology and Amerindian understandings, we don't have a basic ground. We are in different ontologies. Psychology was grounded into a naturalistic ontology. And Amerindian people, they have a kind of, anthropologists are saying that they have a multinaturalistic ontology. So this difference of principle of what's a human being or what's the reality makes very hard the dialogue between our concepts from psychology and their ideas, their understanding of what a person is or what a person should be, and so on. So
I think this is a very important point. And are you guys capturing that what he's suggesting is there has to be a common language between not the language of choice, not the language of the Maya, but shared constructs, right? Where what they terms of maybe even development or what a book is or whatever, it has to blend together so that you are talking the same language with each other to understand.
Yeah.
And he's saying that there's still negotiation happening about how that language intersects with each other. It's very, very important.
Yeah, and what we find is a semiotic gap in between different interethnic dialogical forums. You know, there is a gap, and the work is on this gap. Yeah, in order to bring together or not, maybe not, because sometimes some people don't want to be together, no? And then we have some presuppositions in terms of ontology, otherness versus alterity. And the notion of alterity is very important for us. The other exceeds any comprehension I can have or construct. Disquieting experiences and mistakes are part of the relation with the other. In the epistemological level, we are moving from participant observation into the observant participation. That's the idea that the cognition of the reality is based on distinct mythological and ritualistic backgrounds. There is no dialogue without the construction of a shared affective situation through the expression of the difference. And that's what I was trying to say about working on this nebulous field. It's an affective, mainly affective work, and less cognitive, because when we put our understandings into a cognitive level, we are already working with some cosmological presuppositions, and or psychological presuppositions, or Amerindian, or other ethnic presupposition, because the cognition depends on this sort of mythological background. And in terms of ethics, we are also moving from helping people directly, like assistentialist programs that are very common with this population. But for us, the idea is to construct the basis for multiple dialogues. Psychology needs to focus on the limits and possibilities of personal availability to the other under certain conditions. That is, how to transform vulnerable, scarred, aggressive bodies into more sociable ones, allowing the coexistence of the diverse. Because we have the history of 500 years of violence, and these bodies, our bodies, the Western bodies, were very aggressive, and the Amerindian bodies usually are very scarred. And how can we transform affectively this person in order to make them able to start dialoguing, because the history is not like that. No.
Alterity, do you have a grasp of how they're using that concept? What word do we use in place of that? The disquieting experiences and mistakes are part of the relation with the other. I can't hear. Individualism and also inherent assumptions about another culture, right? It creates a tension between the two cultures until you have that language that can negotiate what it means. And then he's also suggesting that the history of violence creates a situation where there's fear of the people that are coming and want the dialogue now, right? It's like, forget what happened, talk to us.
Yeah. Well, do I have some time? Yeah. Ask. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's the main objective of our work in Amerindian Support Network? For us, the role of the psychologist in the interethnic work is not reduced to find the bridges between both worlds or to find the common language. That's one step, that's something that we can do, but it's not only that. The work also depends on the capacity of the psychologist to support a sort of reflexivity that addresses the ethnic self-affirmation in an interethnic conflictive situation. What I mean here is that of course, to be there and to work with them, we need to find some common, first, a common affective desire or bond, yeah, some affective bond, but also we need to be able not to try always to stress the common, but also to cope with the difference. You know, they are different and they want to be different. They don't want to be like us, and probably we also don't want to be like them. But the idea is the coexistence of the different, and not to find only the commonalities. So I'm developing it in three main steps. The construction of the availability to listen the other, so to leave the experience of negativity, to contradict our presuppositions about what the other is and what they should be. And second, the construction of a common ground for semiotic sharing that's more affective in the affective level. And third, the construction of a supportive attitude to the singular dynamics of differentiation and de-differentiation in the path of overcoming identified psychosocial vulnerabilities, that to be able to deal with the difference of the other and not trying to put them into our categories or to construct new categories that are common, but no, to respect their difference, their perspective, the singularity of their perspective. And we have some theoretical, here is a scheme that shows the steps. The first step is the recognition of the interethnic coexistence. First, we need to recognize that we coexist and we will not try to eliminate the other or to assimilate the other. We coexist in difference. And the second step is the availability to and openness to the other, to construct it in a regular availability in order to build expectancies and confidence, a kind of, if we work regularly with them, then we start to develop a sort of confidence and expectancy. Oh, I know that they will come here, there is a frequency of this coming and so on. It's a very practical orientation to the students. Huh? And then a selective availability, coordinating teams and projects, that's trying to find some commonalities, and asymmetric, not hierarchical availability, guiding the process of ethnic singularization. So we are not becoming the other, and they are not becoming like us, but it's from this asymmetry that the work can develop. And all this we construct in terms of semiotics, like we develop meanings on what's going on in this relationship, but at the same time, these meanings are in the stream of temporality, in the stream of affective exchange that depends on the interethnic attunement, to find a kind of attunement that's more rhythmical, affective than conceptual. We have some ongoing projects there. First, we support the Huvichakweri in Boatã, that it's in the Guarani language. It means meetings of Amerindian leaders. We have some work supporting the Women's Communitarian Council they have in the community. We have some workshops on interethnic communication, so there are some with the adolescents. They have some groups working with music. There is an Amerindian rap, a group of rap that's called Os Guarani. Theater, they want to, because theater was in the history the main strategy of the Jesuits in order to make them Catholic, to convert them to the Catholicism, to the Christianism. And now they want to learn to make the opposite and to construct their own scenes in order to aesthetically show to the national society that are not Amerindian the beauty of their culture. And also news, we work with some news, text and video construction, and they want to develop it. We also support a project on communitarian-based tourism, and also considering the federal law. In Brazil, we have a law that obliges the schools to learn Afro-Brazilian, Afro-African culture and Amerindian culture. In the schools, the schools are obliged to teach, but the teachers, they don't have the formation to teach. They don't know the story and so on. And there is one Amerindian community in the coast that started to develop a project in order to open the community to the schools, and the children can go there and learn from their own speech what is their culture, their history and their culture. You know? And we supported them to construct this project. And also we have some dialogues on the healthcare systems, that they have the right to have a specific healthcare system, assistance, but it doesn't effectively happen, and they need to struggle a lot on it. Well, just to finish, okay? 2 minutes, yeah? Well, the question is how to approach the psychosocial vulnerabilities of the Amerindian communities in order to collaborate with the construction of joint projects to face these psychosocial vulnerabilities. First of all, we described the hard task of living the experience of negativity, listening to the other, and rectifying our preconceptions about the other. Second, through the regularity of meetings in which the listening and the participation in the communitary activities are fundamental, make viable the construction of a confident expectancy of the presence and collaboration of the participant in the interethnic dialogue. And third, select from the experience of listening and participating some topics of personal interest to explore in more details, addressing the construction of joint projects, a stage in which the self and the other achieve a common task in the interethnic dialogical process. The definition of a shared horizon for the future for the interethnic relation. And finally, the continuity of the interethnic dialogue demands the recognition of the asymmetric but not hierarchical positions in the dialogue, allowing the dynamic process of the differentiation and differentiation. From the follow-up of the activities that are ongoing in the community, attentively listening and actively collaborating with it. So we don't have a project that we construct in the university and we go to the community in order to apply it. We construct the project with them. This way of participation allows the construction of the pair expectancy confidence. The construction of collaborative projects, when the topics of a dialogue is selected and starts to be more detailed and sophisticated. And the development of the agreed projects, in which each interlocutor contributes from her asymmetric position. The interethnic dialogue is converted in co-authorship. That's the idea, to build a co-authorship and not an intersubjectivity. So we are not constructing the common, but we are constructing something together out of the relation. That's it. Thank you.
Do you want to do some questions for Dr. Danilo now?
We can do the questions of the presentations. We'll have some time for debate.
Okay. Just before, that's a website. We have a website you can access, and the projects are there. And that's my email. If you want to, if you don't have time to answer everything here, you can just call me.
Thank you. That was great. So Amana Indians, right? South America, North American. It's all the way we would interpret it as our American population, right? Because we tend to be a little ethnocentric in how we approach. So we would ask that you say, oh, South America Indian, right? As opposed to Amana. So my presentation, I have the PowerPoints in Portuguese, but I will speak in English. Okay, I guess I'll use the microphone. So my presentation is in Portuguese, and I'm going to talk in English, though. So you guys will get a chance to experience a presentation in another language while you're listening to English. Our students are in the process of kind of negotiating the language differences, which they've done a beautiful job with. They're all trying to learn phrases in Portuguese to be polite and courteous to everybody. So thank you everyone for coming today. All right, so my presentation is on multicultural research, exploring human rights for youth, LGBT youth across Brazil, Turkey, and the USA. My original research for my doctoral dissertation was cross-cultural work between Brazil and the US, but now we're looking at it multiculturally because we've also added the country of Turkey, in which I was able to interview Muslim youth. So it was a grounded theory study. I'll talk a little bit about the specifics, but I think what's more important is kind of the philosophy of how we approached it and also some of the outcomes I'd like to share with you. So what I did is I divided the research itself up into 4 phases, okay? And I considered each phase part of an overall process that you do as you're approaching especially qualitative work, okay? So the first step is the inception. Up. Oops, let's try it again. There we go. Okay, so the first step is inception, creating the idea. This is where you're formulating your problem statement and looking at what is the need for this research across different cultures. Developing your research question. What do we really need or want to know that's important to international psychology or cross-cultural, multicultural work? The next step is collaboration. As you know, this is your kind of debut into international psychology and coming to another country as a professional. Everyone has traveled before as maybe a tourist to another country, but to enter the country as a professional or respected student who's looking to gain knowledge from the culture, from the group that you're coming to, this is maybe your first step. So the collaborations, the interactions that you have are very critical. And who you decide you want to stay in contact with in terms of meeting your own needs, but also meeting the country's needs or some of the groups that we worked with. Like I shared before, we went to Santa Marcelina, Caritas, basic healthcare units. We used to work with the CAPS program also, so community mental health. So we've had a very rich, I think, exposure for the students this time. So the collaboration is very, very critical for how you're going to look at your own research. The third step is to develop a efficient methodology that you really understand. You're looking first at the what, the inception. The collaboration begins the how. The methodology solidifies the how, okay? So you're looking, you first develop the what do I want to know, and then how am I going to achieve it? How am I going to get at this information? In a cross-cultural sense, right? You're not just looking at one culture. And then finally, the conclusion or the outcomes of your study are really critical. So what I did in thinking about looking at the youth of the gay community, I felt that there was, in the US, we experienced a tremendous amount of stigmatization for this population. Very marginalized group. They're not really embraced within the macro culture. So very often when we talk about cultures, we think about that as a national or an ethnic identity, right? But we can also think about it as inclusion within, or having membership within a group. So if you consider the macro culture as the heteronormative or straight community, the microculture being the gay community, it kind of puts a whole different frame on it for you. And it allows you to see it in one context within the broader context of the way the world operates. So for heteronormative communities, it's a very different frame of reference, and the rules are very different, and they're very clear. And often these rules are framed within the context of the culture, the broader culture of maybe being in the US or being in Brazil, but also the culture of religion and the culture of human development. How somebody achieves growth, what pieces or what areas of development get stopped because of the process that interferes with normal development or healthy, what we consider healthy development. Even though gay youth are developing in exactly the same way, very often we look at it as, there's still a huge disease concept related to it, even though the APA got rid of that many years ago. So I think that kind of providing this frame of a stigmatized group or a marginalized group within the macro culture that supports more diversity. And we're seeing, at least in the US, with the passing of gay marriage and that kind of thing, a little bit more of embracing what I call heteronormative rituals. I don't really see the purpose in gay marriage, myself personally, but I do see it as important as having membership within the broader community. It's kind of like I get to do what you get to do, but then I said, well, think about the outcome of that too. If the relationship doesn't work out, then you have the complication of getting a legal divorce. So I think that it's almost like kind of be careful what you wish for in terms of the rights. Look at yourself in terms of the individual and the person or the group of LGBT people, the collective, looking for rights that are shared within the broader context of the heteronormative community. And as Dr. Danilo pointed out so beautifully, it's not always about the universalisms. It's not always about the things that we share. It's the way to embrace our differences. Right? We don't have to do all the rituals that straight people have to do or want to do. It's okay to have differences, but to peacefully coexist. It's so critical for our nation. And luckily, at least in the US, I'd like to hear what's going on in Brazil maybe a little bit more, but we're so distracted by other things that are happening. It's kind of like, go ahead, have gay marriage, it's okay. You know, we don't have time to worry about that anymore. So it's almost like an afterthought, but if everything quiets down in terms of the other politics, the other things that are going on, it might resurface again as, oh wait, this is a problem, we need to look at this. So I think it's fascinating to watch the development of rights and gaining rights. And the goal always is to have membership, to be considered an equal citizen, to have the same basic rights and access to those rights are really critical. So my research was about social justice, advocacy. What can I do to help the broader macro understand more about the process that gay youth go through that maybe present struggles that they can assist with or similarities to every other kid in the world in terms of what they're discovering. So I think that one of the key points is human rights within the context of religion. It's very, very important because religion is so strong in Brazil, because religion is so strong in Turkey. To say, I think Lisa and I had a conversation about her research and the desire to, well, can we not talk about religion because it's kind of a contentious topic and we don't want to ruffle any feathers. But when you're really looking at a group that's framed and based in terms of how they're accepted, in terms of the shame that they experience, if it's religious based, how can we not have that dialogue, right? Who cares if it's uncomfortable? It's still an important dialogue to have. So I think that as future international psychologists, it's okay to embrace that challenge, to have those really difficult dialogues, but to do it respectfully. And the research that I did with the Muslim youth in Istanbul was just amazing, the stories that I heard doing a grounded theory study. So the rich experience that I was able to take away from that was so powerful that I think it changed my worldview, my assumptions, and I looked at not only these things are very close to what American youth go through or Brazilian youth go through, but also how it was different, but for that youth, it was somehow negotiated in their own head, you know, how to make sense of it, right? I don't have to make sense of it the way a Muslim youth would have to, but to be able to have that dialogue and process with them is so critical and so important, right? So we're looking at universalism versus relativism, influence of sociocultural development, as Professor Danilo said, Vygotsky, right? Sociocultural development. Everything around you influences what you know and who you become. It's not just what you read in a book or what your parents tell you, it's a collective of all that. And then you get to that certain moment in your development when you realize people haven't always told you the truth, that it's kind of like, wait, Santa Claus doesn't exist? Or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy or whatever. And you immediately realize that maybe your parents are a little vulnerable and they're trying to protect you from the world as opposed to really giving you the realities of the world. So as you move into that developmental phase of adolescence, that's where all the tensions begin, right? You lied to me, why didn't you tell me the truth? And then you start to take other people's opinions as maybe more important than just your parents, your grandparents, the people that you live with. So I think that the sociocultural piece is so critical. And then we just talked about the macro versus the micro. In terms of universalisms that we're finding across the three cultures, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is kind of a model for religion. How do they incorporate religion into their gay identity, right? So it's a cultural identity that's being formed, but how do these key pieces play a role in it? So they have to have a plan for rejection. All three cultures, when I did the interviews, each of the youth had some kind of plan that if they disclosed their identity, if things didn't go well, what would I do? And this was a key piece of the narrative that they had, and this occurred in all three cultures. So I found that really fascinating, that they were looking for an out if things didn't go well, as they came out, right? You look for an out as you're coming out. Access to information was critical. 30, 40 years ago, there wasn't the internet. You didn't have access to be able to just go online in your room in the privacy of your own space to get the information you need to find a group that's supporting this or just to read about it, right? So if your mom found a magazine or a book in your room that talked about being gay, you were outed right then. But right now, in this culture, and I interviewed 18 to 21-year-olds, that it was really important for them to be able to access internet privately, right? And they were able to get this information that they needed to realize that they were not alone. So they had membership, they had citizenship, even if it was in an online community, okay? Sometimes they get into messy situations in online, obviously, but it's also what we see as a supportive situation. You look puzzled. Do you know what I'm talking about, Ashley? Oh, okay, all right. Okay, good, yeah. The influence of religion is important, and systems of support are really critical, okay? So, I'm not going to go through each of the steps because we're kind of limited for time, and all of the dissertation students here have heard my take on research. You should do something that you're passionate about, something that you are really, really interested in, okay? And kind of looking at what opportunities you have to collaborate and discuss your research with other people. Don't sit in isolation and try and figure it out. Talk. Talk to people around you, everybody that will listen. Talk to them about your research, because you could develop an important relationship. Because they could say, oh, you know what, I know somebody that's doing that work, or so-and-so has a brother that's, you know, doing something. So always talk, always kind of look for that next collaboration that you have. So this is just talking about TCSs, different field experiences. We're in Brazil, Turkey, Rwanda, Peru, Africa do Sul, South Africa. And Turkey is one that we're developing still, but I have proposed a study abroad there. So this is just kind of a schematic of my collaboration in Chicago. It started out talking about, I did the TPAN AIDS ride, which is a bike ride from Minneapolis to Chicago. And in meeting people there, it kind of led to all of these different contacts. And basically it was Nancy Mullen saying, I am the director of Youth Outlook, come and do your research with us. And I'm like, oh, great. You know, and as you build these relationships, she introduced me to so-and-so, and then you know, I talked to somebody else. I talked to Michael Dentato at the TPAN AIDS ride. He ended up being one of my readers and is a professor at Loyola University. So I was talking about it to everybody, and eventually I was able to make those connections. In Sao Paulo, I came to the University of Sao Paulo. I presented the research to Dr. Paiva, Professor Vieira, and then she introduced me to all of these people. Edici Modesto and Lula Ramirez, who you'll meet tonight if you're interested, okay? And these are just the trees that show. And then Istanbul, I had an opportunity to work with Bilgi University and the Turkish Psychological Association, which is much like the American Psychological Association. And then I was on, I mean, it was kind of crazy. I worked with Adil Isik, and Damian Miles was one of her students, and he had a radio show called Miles to Hollywood, and he invited me and the other professor to be on the radio show, so we got to talk about our research, and it's just fun to be able to negotiate all of those different systems, but enjoy the work that you're doing too. Because these collaborations are people that you'll kind of like to get to know forever and stay friends with. So methodology, clearly we're not going to really go into all of the details of that. For mine, it was a grounded theory study. I did 12 to 15 interviews in each of the countries that were very in-depth, and basically had them tell me their story. I used a disclosure decision process model by Shador and Fisher that if you're interested, I could tell you more about that. But basically, and then I took all of the data and deconstructed it. I had it all transcribed and then translated. So all of it became basically a group story, right? Where I had to kind of tease through what are the similarities and also what makes them unique in terms of a culture. These are important points, and Professor Danilo pointed that out very well. Multiple IRBs, the ethics committee. In Brazil, the ethics committee is very complicated, and you do it all online, but it's very complex, and if you do apply to do research here, you have to present all of your documents in Portuguese. So I had to translate all of them or get them translated, which was quite the challenge, and I was actually in country ready to collect my data when it finally got approved. Dr. Vera was like, she made a phone call, you need to approve this so we can get this moving. But it was right down to the wire, which it always is. So that makes it interesting. It's not moving. It's stuck. There we go. Okay, those are just resources for IRB. I think we're, oops. So I wanted to just share some of the outcomes. So we had 3 major categories. How are we doing on time? 5 minutes? Okay. So we had 3 major themes that we looked at. In sorting through all of the narratives, we had what we called internal mediators, processes that went on for youth only within themselves. We had, number 2 was relational mediators. We initially thought about calling them external, but we realized nothing really happens separate from the person. It's all about the interaction that you have with other people. So the process that went within themselves, the process that went with interacting, and the 3rd theme was outcomes of their disclosure decision. things that maybe empowered them, made them feel very positive about themselves in developing their own identity. So some of the overlapping pieces here was the function of religion. Experiences of discrimination were huge across all three cultures. That whether that discrimination actually happened or they watched it happen, it had the same powerful impact on them because the potential for it to happen to them was very real. Okay? And obviously the cost-benefit analysis of disclosing your identity is very different. In the US, you might have your mom mad at you for a couple weeks. In Turkey, you could lose your life by sharing that because they have honor killings and the family feels like they've been shamed. So the cost-benefit analysis has to be examined based on the cultural context, based on the religion. It's really, really critical. Access to information, as I said before, was really important. In terms of relational mediators, systems of support was very critical. These other ones are stages of sharing their identity, events that allowed them to share an identity, factors that came into play, interacting with other people, gender traditions, identification with other people that shared the same identity. So I think that these are, and if anybody wants of my students, or I can share with anybody that would like to see this. And the last category was outcomes of disclosures, and developing a discourse on human rights was very critical. It was impressive how maturing this process was for kids that were probably their coming out experience actually happened around 14, 15, 16. But they were telling the story at 18 to 21. So they were able to frame this in a larger context of how human rights are affected and what they would like in terms of membership or citizenship. Okay? So it's really kind of cool. I want to keep adding different cultures to it to see if the universalisms are there, but also to be able to have a dialogue with people about what makes it unique in each of the countries. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. And these are just some of the contacts that I've had. We had a dinner where Dr. Pacana, Dr. Fabio, who you got to meet, DJ Modesto, and Lula Ramirez, none of these people had ever met each other, but they were all doing the same work in Sao Paulo. So we had a dinner, and everybody got to come together and have a dialogue, which was fascinating. And then this is Dr. Isik and the two workers from the Turkish Psychological Association. So you never know who you're going to meet, talk, make yourselves known, okay? Thank you. So please think about some questions that you'd like to talk more about.
Agora é o debate. 25 minutos. Well, first, thank you all. I think you brought many important questions for us, and we'll have now some time for debate, around 20 minutes, let's see. And we can start.
Well, there are many differences between Amerindian people and the state society. First of all, I think we can say that they are segmented societies. They don't have any state that organize the communitarian life. every community have their own rules and their own way of living. And so maybe that's why they are so diverse. We have 300. And when the Portuguese first came in Brazil, the estimative is that was more than 1,000 languages speaking in here. Now we have 274. But so they don't have the state, and they are kind of nomad people. But now they are struggling for land demarcation. That's a kind of contradiction, because when they leave a place, the white people start building houses and selling the territory, and then now they are struggling for land demarcation, at least to preserve some place they need, that are connected with their cosmology, with their ancestrality, and so on. Another aspect, they have, well, their language, their own religiosity, if you can say religion. They don't have religion as an institution, but all life is guided by a kind of spirituality. And we have different spiritualities. The Guarani people I work with, they have their own cosmology and their own conceptions about the land, the territory, the other. For instance, one main difference that's common, probably common in all American peoples, from Canada, from Alaska to Patagonia, Argentina, and Chile, is the idea that the multinaturalistic ontology, that means that for Amerindian people, every being in the world has a subjectivity. They are a kind of person, everything in the world. And what we share with other animals and with the nature is the subjectivity, the continuum of subjectivity. And what's different is the body. So the objectivity, the objectivity is the criterion of difference, and then we have different natural words for different bodies. And it's a very, very tricky issue, because, for instance, for the animal, it's kind of what the animals sees themselves as human beings, but we are not able to see them as human beings because of the body difference, and it's it's the opposite of the naturalistic European Eurocentric ontology that claims that the material, the objective reality is common, and only human beings have subjectivity. Only one species has the subjective powers, or the spirituality, and so on. And this ontological difference makes a great difference in this dialogical when we start to dialogue. Because for them, for instance, the forest is a kind of sacred place. It's the place of of a subjective living too. The forest is not an empty place, and yeah, and many other difference comes from this.
Thank you. I think you can.
What do you feel are helpful or effective steps to help people embrace Amerindian culture, like to be aware of it, I guess, and then embrace it? Like what steps do you feel help you meet that goal?
Well, something that they are concerned with is invisibility. They are invisible for Brazilian society because for 500 years, Brazilian society tried to integrate them into the national society and to make them to miss their origins or their belongingness, and their spirituality was claimed as something evil, something bad, and trying to educate them and to put into their minds our values, or the national values. And for them, one main step is to make visible that they are still here and they resist, and with their millennial tradition and this resistance, to make visible this resistance. It's a kind of testimony that we as psychologists we can make, kind of to be a testimony of this, of the suffering also, because this resistance was made with lots and lots of suffering, and to be a kind of testemunha, witness of this suffering and of this resistance, but also to help them to show it, to communicate it to other people, like the music and theater projects, communication projects. So we have this kind of project that's concerned with the visibility. And
so your job is to kind of give voice to these people, to assist.
Yeah. It's a kind of silenced voice that we can help to make it listened and to express. That's one step. The other step, I think, is concerned with to help them to organize themselves. For instance, we help them to make meetings between the leaders, among the leaders, and to let them to discuss their issues in their way of discussing. So the meetings were in the community, not in the university. And they claimed for the meetings in the community, in their house of meetings, because they have their own way of dialogue. So we could help them, to support them, to improve, to continue doing this. And that's another, I think, the second step. Or, I don't know if there is the first or the second, but they go in parallel. You know?
So you facilitate the conversations between the group and the government, or the university?
Also between the group and the government, it's good point. And we some governmental institution call us to mediate these dialogues, because the government, they don't know how to dialogue with these people, and they sell that we know how to do it because we are close to them, and we have some reports, some from the Women's Council. Some women says, "Oh, it's good because you work here, and now we can express our feelings better in Portuguese, and we can talk face to face with white people in a more equitative way." And that's, I think, it's very important. Yes. For instance, in the history of these Guarani people I work with, every step the civilization went into the forest, starts building the cities in the countryside. They use it to leave the place, to more to inside the country, to hid themselves from the civilizatory process. They intended to do it, but now they know that they are not able to fugir, to escape anymore from the contact, and they are trying to work in this boundary and try to make this kind of dialogue in the boundary between their tradition and our Western tradition in Brazil. And they think that one of the contributions they can do is concerned with the environmental preservation, the global warming and so on. They say, well, we know how to take care of the forests, for instance, and that's good for everybody. Yeah, because they say that they built this forest in Brazil, the rainforest, the Amazonic forest. It was not an empty place, as I told you, but it was built with permaculture, for instance, and they know how to build the forest and to build back in some areas too. And
they also came from a place of compromise. They've already been compromised, so everything that all you guys are doing is advocating for them to gain their rights back.
yeah,
Right? They've already given up as much as they can. So the compromise is already there, and it's almost, I think you spoke also about not creating genocide, not wiping out the ethnic identity in the history books or in real life. So I think that what they're doing is helping to gain an identity to regain rights that they've lost already. But it's an important question. I think it's an important frame of reference. Right?
yeah.
I think.
Excuse me. So I just think I want to talk about an organizational aspect and actually start by apologizing to you. We got started today a bit in a rush, and we forgot to talk to you about whether or not it's okay to record that. I understand Dalva had been in touch with Robert and all, so I don't know if you've already talked about that. But we do have a structure. We usually record that. We put it online on the channel of the university, and we record the audio as well. Is that okay for you? Yes. Great. So actually, we have already started from the beginning, but we could erase it. We were just talking. We could if you were not comfortable, we would block that. But. And then I would ask you also if you could do the effort of speaking on the microphone so we can record it, because if you don't use it, we cannot get the audio.
Yeah, so he's going to hand you the microphone to ask your question, so it'll be on the audio recording.
Thank you. My question is for...
I think it was her first.
So my question is for, I guess, both of you, is that you talked about just the interaction between different cultures and accepting differences and recognizing similarities. I'm just curious to know how you would approach, so if I wanted to do research in a country that, there's history of colonization, how would you, let's say as an American going into and wanting to do research there, when there's the historical pieces to it, how would I approach that and say, hey, I'd like to go in and do some research? Could you both kind of speak to that a little?
I think part of what we didn't have an opportunity to do as well as we normally do is to review the history of how colonization happened, what effects the colonization had, especially on the indigenous groups here, the Amera Indians. But Professor Danilo isn't only talking about Brazil, he's talking about all of Latin America, right? So I think that's an important context too, is that their project is kind of considering, do you refer to as indigenous, the original people? Okay, prior to colonization, prior to being discovered, all of these people were living here, right? And nobody discovered them, they were already here. So I think having that knowledge going into the country is to do as much research on the history, on the impact that colonization has had, is really critical. And then having actual dialogues with the people you're going to work with so that you really understand the context. I think what was missing with Caritas also was we never actually got to talk about the context of the Parazopolis community and how they are impacted by stigmatization and marginalization, so that the work that Caritas does has to be framed and approached from that perspective. If you don't have that perspective, you're kind of missing a piece. So, and I'll defer to Professor Danilo here, but my recommendation is to get as much history as you can, and then have dialogues about how that impacted and what it looks like today. You know, some of the effects of colonization you see everywhere.
I agree. I think the history is important for you to get, and also I presented here the moving from the observant participation. That's for me the idea that we have a research issue, a question, and in our mind or in the an academic question, then we go to the community to make research. But I do on the contrary. First, the students they go to the community to work with them collaboratively, and after that, sometimes the need for a research can emerge from the very practical, empirical living and working together, collaborative work, you know, and then from this participation in the community, the questions can emerge, and it's a good question also for them. They also have questions that the university could help them to develop. So the idea is the other way, you know, but it's not from the university to the community, but from the immersion in the community to the university. And I would like to also to come back to the question of compromise. I think also that yes, what these people say is that they don't want all the land of Brazil back. They don't want it back, all of it back. They just want some place. They want to live well with the others, and they are able to. The idea is how to coexist peacefully, and not always being threatened.
That's an important point. They're not, even though they were nomadic people and all of Brazil was theirs before we arrived, now they're saying, we'd be happy if you just gave us a little bit of space that we could live on. We won't bother you, you don't bother us, and let's exist together. Yeah. But in the past, they could go wherever they wanted. There was no restriction on that. So the compromise is always, you know, they're just trying to gain back some of what they had prior to colonization and people coming and discovering them, you know. So, good questions.
Good morning. This is for Professor Cleve. I'd like to know exactly what was your research question, and due to the sensitive nature and stigma associated with your subject matter, what were some of the challenges you faced in the recruitment of participants and data collection, and how did you overcome these challenges?
Good question. So my research question was born out of my own personal experiences, you know, as a gay male, that if I wanted to better understand what that disclosure process is like for other people, because my own disclosure process was very unusual, which I'm not going to necessarily share right now, but I'm happy to talk about at dinner or something. It's it kind of became a passion of mine, is to be able to help youth not affect other people's lives, right, by being gay, and to be able to understand what that was like, to be able to share it freely when they could. So my question was, what are the lived experiences of gay males in the US and Brazil? It was terribly broad, right? But doing a grounded theory qualitative study, I was able to kind of just go in with a framework of how I wanted to look at disclosure decisions based on a theoretical framework, developed interview questions that would allow me to delve into that experience for those youth and draw it out. The participants were all gathered by the collaborations that I had. I had Youth Outlook, Center on Halstead in Chicago, because I met Michael Dentato and Nancy Mullen in Brazil, São Paulo. I met with Professor Vera, 3 hours of interrogation. She gave me question after question after question. Why do you want to do this work? Why do you want to do it in Brazil? I'm like, I love Brazilians. I love Brazil, you know, it's okay. But within 1 hour, Dr. Picana and I were in the car driving to 2 NGOs that she had called and said, I'm sending some people over to talk to you. DJ Modesto and Lula Ramirez, and that's where I secured all of my participants for the study. So it's, a lot of it is very serendipitous. You have to kind of pay attention to what's going on around you, but it also can be very purposeful in how you present the material. So you have to be able to have that elevator speech and that research question at your fingertips, right? So this afternoon, when you guys get to talk about your research interests, it's really important to share whether or not Professor Danilo, Professor Alessandro, Professor Pablo can help you process that and move it through the university.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning. Professor Danilo, please tell for us some advice if a person would like to make a research in a community, some aspects of what is possible or difficult to make a research in this kind of indigenous community, especially in Brazil.
Yeah. We have some laws concerning some specific rules concerning the research with Amerindian communities. We need to apply to an ethical committee and they pass through a very specific evaluation that's more rigorous than the others. Then it takes lots of time to get an approbation to make research in the communities. And also, in order to go into their lands as a researcher, you need also the permission of a National Foundation of Amerindian People, that's a Brazilian foundation, that allow us, that are able to allow us as a researcher to get into the communities. And also you need the approbation of the community. For the leaders of the community need to approve, so you need to explain to them what's the research, the meaning, the objective, and so on. So it's a very hard, lots of documents, bureaucracy. It's not easy. And that's why we decided to also, one of the reasons that for us, but if we go as a university working as a service to the community, you don't need any of this documentation. So it's easier for us to access the communities as a service than as a researcher. And that's why I do theoretical research concerning the interethnic processes, the cultural, the construction of meaning in interethnic situations. I don't collect data. The students don't go to the community to get data. They have their formation, they experience that environment, and they participate in the communitarian processes, but they don't get data. But of course, we learn a lot out of this participation, and we can come to the university and study and make reflections and construct theoretical theories out of it.
Can you talk a little bit about what the students do when they go to the community? What kind of services?
He's asking what the students do. They do mainly conversation, a round of conversations. They dialogue with the leaders and with the community. They mediate, for instance, the council of women's council. And the students, the girls, they go to the community and make meetings with the women, and they start discussing what's going on and the women issues, like somehow they have some difficulties in order to participate in the communitarian policies and to make decisions, to negotiate with the men, and so on. And also they are concerned with some domestic violence that sometimes happens, or the children, the upbringing of children, and how to take care of children in their cultural way, all this kind of issue. And also the students work with the adolescents, with the group, music group. I have some students that they are musicians too, and they work together producing music. And some students, they are actors, and they work together with some of the adolescents constructing the scenes. And some students, they work constructing texts with them, helping them to construct texts, or on making movies, some movies that talk about the community, about the vulnerabilities they live, healthcare the problems in the healthcare systems, the educational issues, and this kind of thing. In the background, we are working with, for instance, with drug abuse, and we are working with alcohol abuse too, but not addressing it directly, because if these adolescents, if they feel themselves, if their self-esteem is okay, probably they will not abuse in drugs or in alcohol and other kind of vulnerabilities. So that's more or less what do they do there.
That's fantastic. Wow.
A last question.
Good morning. You just touched on some information about how the students interact with the community and collaborate with the community. How do you encourage participation from the community? How do you get the community of American Indians involved?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's not easy. It was a long process. I worked with the communities for 5 years. It was a very long process, and it started very, at the beginning they were concerned with me. The first guy, he was a teacher in the community, and he just said to me that, please don't come to make research here. The first thing he said to me was, don't come to make research. And I said to him, okay, I will just go to meet you and to meet the community because I'm interested in it. I also have an Amerindian background in my family, and I intended to connect with this ancestrality too. And I went to the community to know them, to meet them, and to see how things was going on. And after that, they started presenting me some of their needs. And most was assistential, like food, clothes, and this kind of issue. And I started to think about how the university could collaborate and how psychology could collaborate in this context that was not bringing them food or clothes, but presenting to them or constructing with them a kind of service that could be helpful. And that's why it started. And then now they invite me to go there, and sometimes we have to select the students here, and I invite them, and we make a table, and they help me to select who is the student that is able to be in the community, you know, because it's a collaboration, and it's their community. It's not it's their house. We cannot invade this place like that. You need to be respectful, and they need to open the place for us.
I think Professor Danilo is a true anthropologist. Yeah. Yeah. So he's aware to go into the community gently, quietly, and the true test of doing cross-cultural research is that you don't leave a footprint. You don't change anything while you're there or disrupt, right? You may be able to offer knowledge, but beyond that, you never appeared. You're invisible.
I'd like to thank you all for the debate, and we're going to have now 15 minutes for a coffee break.
Thank you. So we're gonna, I think we're gonna walk out into the.
I think there is some. I think there's a little bit of coffee here. I don't know. We're gonna see it. Dalva was. Do we have? Temos café aqui? Oh, unfortunately not. It didn't work out. Sorry. Okay, so let me introduce. Do you want to? Let me introduce you to Dalva, who's been in Chicago for 4 months. Is that so?
But my English is too bad that I am not able to speak.
Dalva was my student in exchange. It wasn't faculty, I guess it was exchange staff program. So
Yeah.
he came and worked and he wanted to understand how the international technology program works. And so he was telling me he was one of the things I was telling me really English. So we had a wonderful time.
Yeah, and she's been really very proactive on the organization of this. She's really committed to do the best she can. Has helped a lot indeed. And but we couldn't get the coffee though, so we have two sort of trucks here, one over there and one over there. You can get coffee and snacks, and yeah. But please try to be here by 11:10, so 15 minutes